Welcome to the Rural Missions Podcast. We exist to enable rural churches in God's mission. So join us now as we hear stories of hope from across the UK. So welcome to the Rural Missions Podcast. I'm your host, Bob Goody, and today I am joined by one of my friends, going back some years now, the lovely Pete Winmill. Hello, Pete.
Hi, Bob. It's good to be with you and catch up. Memories have been flowing.
So, Pete, people might have heard your name, they might not have heard your name. Who are you? Where are you from? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Pete Winmill, married to Christine. 2 adult sons, married, and 5 grandchildren. They're all involved in different Christian ministries as well. But my key passion is adults with learning disabilities. And so as Count Everyone In, we're a charity nearly 8 years old now that is committed to that no one with a learning disability misses out on who Jesus is. And that comes on the back of about 20 years experience that my wife and I have each got of just working in this area of trying to wake churches up, basically, to what they're missing.
So, Pete, you say Count Everyone In, you've been running it for a few years. What does it mean? How do you support?
Okay, well, here we are at Spring Harvest this year, and we have a colleague who's running some celebrations for adults with learning disabilities. In fact, I've just come from there now, where basically they're demonstrating how you can tell stories from the Bible, tell simple, accessible things from the Bible in a way that whether you can read or write, whether you can talk or not, whether your understanding is fairly high or fairly low, you can still access what the Bible has to say. And alongside that, we have an exhibition area so people can come and talk more. But the key thrust, I suppose, of what we do, that's like the shop window. But the key face is when we go out and train and equip churches, we run workshops to enable them to begin to first of all say, well, what does it mean to be a human being? What does the Bible say? What does it have to say about disability? And slowly people begin to realize that actually we're not talking about disability. We're talking about who we are, created in the image of God, that we're amazingly and wonderfully made. And it doesn't say, oh, if you happen to be able-bodied, you are. It says, as human beings, we are. So we do that. So we have 3 training days around that. The first one's called Longing to Belong, and that goes through those basics and begins to look at language communication. And then the second one gets a little bit more interesting, which is probably unfair to the first one, but this is where we get people starting talking about relationships, bereavement. What does it mean to not be able to access lots of things? How do we help people to access things in a way that is real for them? Not maybe the way that you and I would think about it, but actually when you look at it, you suddenly think, oh yeah, that's what I meant, because of the way that it's coming across. And then the third one, we've had the privilege of working with the Makaton charity, which is keyword signing. So it's derived from BSL, which many people will probably know. But derived from there, it's keyword signing. So it's not like BSL, which changes the format of sentences. It's keyword signing, exactly what it says. But the signs that are used are aiding understanding. So unlike BSL, you speak and sign, and it just helps people to grasp a little bit more of what we're talking about. Go out preaching, going out, all sorts of things like that. Just to raise awareness for people that so often the world is either forgotten or pushed into a corner. And then, dare I say it, we do it as church as well. They're in the corner. They seem to be happy every time they go. Yeah, they might be happy, but what do they understand of what we would want them to understand about Jesus?
That's great. And obviously, alongside that, you're supporting the church, equipping them, raising awareness, because this isn't just an urban thing. This is definitely the case for the rural church. But you also provide resources as well, don't you?
We do, and they're simple, accessible Bible reading notes using the New International Reader's Version, the accessible edition, and basically they're shorter sentences in that, in enabling those who perhaps a lesser reading ability and about the age of 9 to be able to read for themselves rather than having it read to them. But if it is read to them, then it's read at where they're at, more their level of understanding of things. We also have teaching. We're being interrupted, aren't we?
That's it. For those that are listening, we are at Spring Harvest in the Team Leaders Lounge at the moment recording this. So forgive if you can hear, that's Deborah Green. She's written a book. She knows a lot of people. So just bear with us with some background noise. So sorry, Pete, you're in the midst of it all.
But we also have teaching booklets that we're beginning to grow a series on that will enable leaders to run more like we do at Spring Harvest. Set pieces, set times. So we've got one on Ruth, we've got one on Joseph. And the Joseph ones go through life issues, really. So it's about persecution. It's about putting in prison when you're not, or things happening to you. When why am I here? What's this about? And how we deal with anger. And, well, I shouldn't be in prison. Do you deal with that in anger? Or do you, as Joseph did, ultimately let God use him to his greater glory?
Yeah, that's good. And so, Pete, you have been running this ministry for a while. You said your wife, Christine, and yourself have been involved in working with adults with learning disabilities for a number of years. Is that because that is who you are? Is that your background? What actually gave you the heart for setting up this ministry?
The honest answer is the job I didn't want. Many years ago, a charity called Prospects used to run celebrations at Spring Harvest. And I don't know how many of your listeners will know, but of a lady called Johnny Erickson-Tana from America. She's paraplegic, but she sings like a lark. She paints with a toothbrush, with a paintbrush in her mouth. She has an amazing teaching and preaching ministry as well. And she uses a wheelchair, paraplegic, and she needs a lot of help. But she came into the celebrations at Spring Harvest at Minehead many years ago, saw what was happening, said, "This is amazing," and said to Tony, the then director, "Well, what would you do if you had more money?" And he said, "Well, it's easy, I'd employ somebody else." And so she agreed after a little while of transatlantic communications that she would 50% fund a year's money for a post as long as he raised the 50% in 2 weeks.
Wow.
And this is back before emails were used like they are today. So this was snail mail. Within 10 days, that money had come in. Now, you're probably thinking, but where are you getting to? Where's the passion? I said, a job that I didn't want. That's the background. So my mate, a fellow lay church leader, used to lead worship for Prospects at Spring Harvest. His job in BT was redundant. So when this offer came through, Tony, the director, said to my friend Malcolm, "Well, why didn't you apply for it?" And he said, "No, it's not me." He said, "I'll continue supporting you voluntary." He said, "I know a man that can do this. He's not available and he won't want it." So, of course, he tells me the story. I laughed like you just did.
Yeah.
He said, "You got to be kidding. That's not me." It freaked me out, to be honest. My wife was involved in a group in her own church, but not me, thank you. Anyway, a few weeks later, I was made redundant. And you'd think, "Oh, well, there it is, Pete." No, not me. Arrogant so-and-so. I said to God, "If you want me to do this, you're going to have to work on my head.
Yeah.
You're going to have to work on my heart. You know what? A few gifts wouldn't go amiss." And I went for the interview. I rocked it, apparently. I don't know how. I do, God. Because I've had no experience. I got no background. There's no one in the family, which is pretty unique, actually. And I got the job, but it suddenly wasn't full-time. It was part-time because they wanted somebody else on board as well.
Right.
So I went from a junior BT manager post, which was fairly good money, to half a charity salary. And you know what? We didn't look back once. God literally provided our every need. And so I started working for Prospects. Things didn't go quite as we expected. Ultimately, with Prospects, we had to merge with another charity because of lack of funding. And we felt God very clearly in the end. Well, it did help when total strangers walk up to you with scriptures and go, don't know why, but I think you should read this. We kept reading and think, oh, we think we know. You know, Bob, you know it as well as many people do. I'm now 70. 8 years ago, I didn't expect to be starting a new charity, but it was blatantly clear. And when we did, the relief at saying, yes, this is it. So May the 1st, 8 years, we have grown phenomenally in that 8 years. We're slowly beginning to build a team around us of volunteers. And very shortly, can't say too much, but somebody else will also be joining us on the payroll rather than just ad hoc.
Yeah, brilliant. So Pete, I said earlier that obviously learning disabilities is not just an urbanized thing. It is very much happening in our villages and communities. Most of the churches we talk to at Rural Missions are small, a dozen, couple of dozen. How could they start to engage adults with learning disabilities and start to bring the gospel into that area of the community?
If I could do my normal, I've answered just before that.
Of course you can.
In the sense that many churches, whether they're in our villages, whether they're in our towns, say, hey, we don't have anyone like that in our church. And I have to be honest, there's sometimes where I've perhaps been in the church service and I've smiled to myself because we've worked in that area for, not always, but you do know. A lot of them are hidden, and therefore, unless you began to work in that area, you wouldn't know. We were in a small village church for a while, and there was a guy who was loved and valued by the church. He had a robed position in the church, not a cleric, somebody who used to dress up and hold his pole. I should remember what his name was, and it wasn't church warden either. But he actually said to me one day, he said, Pete, I can't sign my name. I have to put a cross. I never really went to school. I can't read, I can't write. But they love me here. Now, the church didn't know they had somebody with a learning disability in their building. But here was somebody who was acknowledging the fact that he couldn't read or write. He couldn't sign a signature.
Yeah.
He had a learning disability. But you know what? Bless them. They loved him and they cared for him. They supported him. They gave him a role. They honoured him in that role. So when churches say to me, rural or not, there isn't anybody like this, I put, it's closer than you think.
Yeah.
So what do? Well, you look at things that you do in your church. You look at the way that you do them. You look at the language. You know, Christians are great at what my wife calls Christianese. We have an amazing language, and I don't want us to lose that.
Yeah.
But couldn't we help people to understand the words that we just used?
Yeah.
Not to wipe them out, but say, oh, what that means is, or some of the hymns that we sing, that they were great for Charles Wesley. I'm going to get every Methodist in the country shooting me down. And I love Wesley's hymns. But they were written for an age.
Yeah.
Now, does that mean that I'm saying the modern songs and hymns are good? No, they're not. Because actually, in their own way, they're doing exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
And so in our training and our equipping of churches, we say, look at your language. Most churches these days project.
Yeah.
And they use fonts on the screen that if your reading is low ability, you can't read what's in it. Curly A's and everything else. Nice and simple, like Century Gothic.
Yeah.
Rounded. The other thing that the church has got a real B for now is central justification of all songs. Did you know that if you happen to be dyslexic, it's a nightmare finding the next line?
Oh, I've not even.
It's only recent I was reading up about, how do we make things more accessible?
Mm.
And I read this, and it said the church has done the biggest disservice they could do to many people and their congregations. So I was chatting away to our chair of government. So you never guess what I've just learned, because it's great that he knows those things as well.
Yeah.
And he looked at me, and he's in the same church as me, and he went, "Oh, that's why I'm now struggling reading the songs." And even though he knows them, the fact that he knows them almost makes it a hindrance, because he's looking for that word on the next line, and it's not. It's about a third of the way along.
Yeah.
So by the time he's found it, we're on the next line.
Yeah. And I do know some churches who think they've solved it by only putting one line at a time up as well. So my church, we only do one line at a time. But actually, by the time it's up, you're partway through singing it, and therefore it can be just as detrimental.
3 is better.
Yeah.
And then you move it on because it fades in and out.
Yeah.
And do they do it in capitals?
No.
Good. That was the right answer.
Yeah. Because although we are at a festival right now that are doing single line. Yeah.
And capitals often.
Yeah.
Yeah. But nobody should get involved in ministry like what you're involved in, what I'm involved in, without being in it for the long haul.
Amen.
It takes time. We are creatures of habits. We love the way we do it.
Yeah.
And therefore, I used to get teased that I gave out business cards like confetti. I loved it. Well, one day I had an email from a pastor, and he said, "Pete, you may not remember me, but we met outside a windmill in France.
As you do.
5 years ago, we got chatting, and you said, 'Oh, well, take my card. You never know.' He said, 'Well, today's the day.'"
Wow.
So I took it to my boss. He said, "Don't you dare ever take the mickey out of me again."
Yeah.
This is why you do it, because people think, "Hold on, I did meet somebody." So it begins to build.
Yeah. I've got a pocket full of business cards as we speak, Pete. So yeah, I'm in that same boat. And I think what you're saying, there is a real truth in it, because even when I first started out in ministry and we met each other about 15 years ago now, I think it was.
It could have been longer than that, but don't be too scared.
It really opened my eyes to what does this look like. And I remember I went back from spring harvest holidays where we were, and I remember the Anglican church I was in, we were talking, did a sermon, and at one point I talked about being washed in the blood of the Lamb. And it wasn't until after the service when we had a lady that had Down syndrome within the congregation. She was in floods of tears, like could not console her in any way, shape or form. And it's because her head had immediately gone that I was going to wash her literally with lamb's blood at the end of the service.
How yucky is that?
No. And despite some of our best efforts to try and explain it, and the church I'm currently in, we try to make sure that we are as seeker and disability as friendly as we possibly can be. So even if we say, "Oh, you'll know the story of David and Goliath," well, you won't. Don't.
Especially if the unchurched are there.
Yeah. So today I'm going to read from John. It's one of the Gospels in the New Testament part of the Bible. Simple adjustments that make it accessible for people. I'm already sold on it. Hence, we're having this conversation, Pete.
But the outreach in an urban community, is not that different from being in the rural either. Because the numbers of adults with learning disability that are registered in this country, 1.8 million, I think it is. When you think of the families that are affected, 1 in 20, There isn't a line across the road that says I've just moved from urban to rural.
Yeah.
In fact, I would almost argue that it could well be higher in rural than it is in urban.
Yeah.
That's just the way things are.
Mm.
You go to pockets around East Anglia or down in the southwest, the percentages are that much higher. And I talk to people in both those areas and they go, oh, that's small.
Yeah.
Now, if you think about that, if you are making provision as a small church in a rural community, because you've got beyond, well, we've got to try and keep this place open somehow, to actually, what's our calling? What are we here for? Now, it's not just putting bottoms on seats. I nearly said something else. Yeah. It's actually about reaching people and helping them to see that there is a Jesus who loves them. And do you know what? So do we. Yeah. So if you take that 1 in 20, that 1 in 20's got mums, dads, carers. They've got support staff around them. Yeah. So many of them, when they see the love that actually genuinely is given by a Christian, not with just, oh, well, they're vulnerable, it's nice to do something for them, but actually genuinely wanting friendship and building up. Always, always, always remembering safeguarding. Yeah. Then they will actually begin to follow. Our own group, yes, we're in a town. Yeah. And the group that we run, my wife and I, in our church, is a civic church, a city church, listed beyond what you want it to be because it causes problems. But we've now got carers telling other carers what this church is doing for those that they care for. And they're telling them because they see the love that we have, not because this will be an easy catch. Yeah. And believe me, it won't be an easy catch because they'll be more honest with you about what they're getting. Yeah. Than many of the rest of us will be. Yeah.
But there's such an innate spirituality. So some of the most spiritually discerning individuals I've ever met are adults with learning disabilities. Yeah. And the realism in their prayers, in their speech, and as you said, they're going to be more honest. So they're actually more honest with Jesus as well. So there is a real clarity to be brought there. And I know talking to your wife yesterday, and I know because obviously I'm a keen supporter of Count Everyone In, that you do have a dream of that nobody with a learning disability should have to travel more than 5 miles.
5 miles, which seems crazy, doesn't it?
Yeah. And that's not a general, I mean to church.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. You know, many of us, if we choose to go to the church we go to. Yeah. We like the music, we like the preacher, we like people around us. But for a person with a learning disability, often they have to be taken. Yeah. And if that carer is going to be helping them, then they want to be able to take them to a church where they are going to be understood and can be helped to understand. Yeah. So one, being able to travel no more than 5 miles might seem bonkers, but actually that would be a huge, huge start. In some parts of the country to find a church that is accessible for them could be 20, 30 miles. Yeah. So if every 5 miles there was a church, that would be a huge difference. But you know what? I want every church to be accessible. Yeah. That's something we have to start somewhere. Yeah. But my heart says I want every church. Yeah.
And if we go back to a Jesus model, because that's a good place to be for a church, Jesus used parables and used the stories of the time and the occupations of the people around him to be able to make the kingdom of God accessible to the people he was talking to.
Yeah.
Farmers who talk sheep and so on and so forth. And all we're doing and all we're saying is let's look to make our churches more accessible in our speech, in our outworking, so that all can engage.
Yeah.
And as the name on your badge says, we count everyone in.
Yeah, I get people coming up to us here and say, I'd love to come in and see what you do, but I can't, can I? And I go, why? Knowing full well what the answer. Yeah. I haven't got a learning disability. And I just point to our logo and says, what does it say?
Yeah.
Count everyone in. Yeah, right. You're welcome.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So there's a whole load of ideas and bits that have been coming out there, Pete, and I'm just wondering, do you have one story that we could round up our podcast with? So we always look for a story of hope that is happening, like what's God up to? Do you have one of those that you can share with us?
It's one of hope, but it's one that's sad. You were saying about the spirituality amongst guys with learning disabilities. I remember not too long ago, a young lady with Downs who worshipped in a C of E. She was on the PCC. If she got really, really nervous, she could barely read what was in front of her. She was supported on being on the PCC because they wanted representation of the person in the pew. She was one of them. And the vicar often used to say she was the best prepared for any PCC meeting. So when it was beginning to get late and he'd look at his watch and go, I think we ought to be wrapping up now.
Yeah.
She'd go, we can't. We've got another 4 points on here. I prepared for this.
Yeah.
And he said, I have to say, you'd see the eyes of the others around the table. Here we go. What time are we going to finish? To him saying, actually, you're right. The agenda was set for us to get through tonight.
Yeah.
You have prepared. We need to honour you in the fact that you prepared. But another story about that same person. I said about her reading, and if she got really anxious, she would start stuttering. And she was doing the reading, this particular Sunday. She goes up to the lectern, and she's reading one of the shortest verses in the book that comes up within this passage. You'll probably guess where I'm going. But she's going there, and she begins, and she's starting to read it through. She's on one side of the aisle, and the vicar is on the other. And the reality of the fact that she was very shortly going to be saying, Jesus wept, and dawns on her. And so she's standing there and she's suddenly going, and he just gently walked across the aisle, didn't say a word, and just gently put his hand on her shoulder. Still didn't say a word. And eventually she gets to that point and she said, Jesus wept. And the vicar said you could see hardly a dry eye in the room. And he said, you could argue, and he said, you'd have been right too, but I could not do this. I'm the vicar. We've had the sermon preached already. Now, she preached it.
Wow.
Because she lived it as she read it.
Yeah. And I don't know about the people that are listening, but I can feel my eyes starting to well at that. And there is beauty in it if we count everyone in, if we let everyone be part of what God's doing and helping all to find and follow Jesus. It's a real priority.
Absolutely.
So, Pete, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you.
If people want to get in touch, find out more about Count Everyone In, book you to come do some training, get a hold of the Bible, the study guides.
Yep.
What would they do, Pete?
Go to the website, counteveryonein.org.uk. If you want any direct information, there's emails on there as well, but info@counteveryone. It's count everyone in. Count everyone in, because so people drop out the one. I don't know why. But that's the name of the charity. That's what we want to stand by.
Yeah.
And you find that on the web, and there's all sorts of information on that.
Perfect. And if you get stuck, get in touch with us. Like I'm friends with Pete and Christine and would happily point you in their direction. But do check out counteveryonein.org.uk for their information, resources, and to book some training. Get them to come to your next church meeting and to see how you can, as a church, count everyone in. So thank you, Pete. Thank you all for listening, and join us next time for the next Rural Missions podcast.
Thank you.
To find out how we can support your church, head to ruralmissions.org.uk.